Hello and welcome to Alive and Composing, the wonderful world of Innova with today's guest, David Keberle. Please state your name for the record, David.
David Keberle.
Where does such a name come from?
Well, it's an interesting story. My grandfather was from a place in Czechoslovakia, pre-Czechoslovakia. He came over on the boat in 1901. His name was actually Keberle, with a G. But at Ellis Island, when they asked him to speak his name, he said, "My name is Václav Keberle," and they spelled it with a K. So from then on, we've been the Keberles.
Well, that's good enough for us, and you're making it an even more famous name with your wonderful doings. And I know you move around a lot, but do you have a pet at home? And what would it be its name if you had one?
You know, we've had some pet goldfish. Unfortunately, though, they don't last too long in our house. I think we did have a pet once with a fish that his name was Freddy.
Okay, you know, after a tiring day at that machine behind you, which I think has a keyboard attached to it, how do you spoil yourself? Do you have any guilty pleasures that we should know about?
Well, recently, since we live so close to the sound here, I've been indoctrinated into fishing. We have discovered that there is an ancient fishing spot just a block and a half from my street, which we didn't know when we moved into the house. And I say ancient, I'm talking about the Indians, the Native Americans, prehistoric, used to live in this area. And at certain times of the year, the fish are just jumping into the boat, basically.
And you refer to the place as here. Where is here? Where is there?
This is Brantford, Connecticut.
And, you know, where's that? Is it within easy reach of your day job?
It's not in a very easy reach. It's up the shore. Brantford is about 10 miles north of New Haven in Connecticut. We're about 110 miles from New York City, where I teach. And
do you have a fishing cap nearby? If you put a hat on your head?
Actually, I do. And this one, if you buy the CD, you might, recognize me. You know.
Oh, you're that David Keberle. Great. So you've mentioned fishing, and your CD that we'll come back to eventually have to do with icebergs and things. Do you really like to go to the Arctic and fish up there?
Well, but I'm from Wisconsin, not too far from Minneapolis. Grew up there, and my father, before I could even walk, would take me out on the ice fishing in the winter. So I do have that connection, yes. It was a little bit cold, not something I do much anymore, and we rarely have ice here in Connecticut, so on the water. So I haven't done that for probably 50 years, but, I can relate to the ice.
What's the weirdest dream that you've ever had?
Oh, I suppose, I have a constant dream that I'm jumping off some kind of large building and flying through the air, and how wonderful that the sensation feels, floating and flying.
Which reminds me of your music. Do you see any connection between your wonderful floaty music and your deep recesses of your reptilian brain?
I think so. I mean, a lot of what I do is intuitive, although I, spend a lot of painstaking time going over details. I base, everything that I do on my gut and my intuitive feeling and thinking and experiences, so I'm sure that's a part of it. And you can hear that in the music. I wouldn't be surprised.
Now, tell us about your time in Italy. I know you have one foot in that climate over there, and how does Italy compare to Brantford, Connecticut?
Well, as you can imagine, it's quite different. I mean, Italy, I had the fortune, I had a Fulbright scholarship back there, and then in 1980, I then stayed there for about 17 years. I extended the Fulbright. Fulbright was only for a year, unfortunately, but I stayed there and worked as a freelance musician, clarinetist, composer, did a lot of contemporary music, recordings. Italy's a lot different. Just the light is fabulous, and you can't really appreciate that till you're there. When you get off the plane, it just seems like a very special place. The people are very special, and it's a great part of my adult life, I say, I grew up as an Italian, even though it's not directly in my blood, I feel part Italian, and that's reflected in the titles of some of my pieces, and the performers too. Some of them are Italian, and I still have some very good friends there in Italy.
Do you find the role of music is different over there? Do you miss not being called Maestro over here?
Yeah, I do. I mean, there, everybody knew who you were, I guess, and even when I would pull up to the local gas station, the attendant there would say, "Oh, Maestro, how much today, you know? Quanto vuole, you know? Maestro." So, yeah, I do miss that. I miss it very much, actually. I mean, the food, the wine, everything else that goes with that.
Got any good recipes?
You know, my friends will know right away. My specialty, if you come to visit, and I hope you do sometime, Phil, is spaghetti alla carbonara.
All right. That's what I'll have absolutely first. And I don't know if there are any desert islands near the shores of Italy, maybe just off Sicily, or maybe the mafia would send you to one. But if you were there, which MP3s would you take? Some kind of music that's really in your blood, maybe a sound world that you grew up with, or a piece or a memory that's too nostalgic to leave behind.
Well, I would take, I suppose, some classics, a Beethoven symphony, with me, probably some Bach inventions, and then I would probably, jump up to the 20th century and take some Elvin Berg and perhaps a little bit farther ahead, a little John Cage, and then some Steve Reich, and like that, I guess.
What's your greatest fear?
Fear of growing old, I guess. Growing old, yeah.
All right. What's the most mind-blowing work of art that you've ever come across? Did you ever walk into a room or a space or read a book or a poem or look at a picture and think, my life will never be the same again?
Wow, I'll have to think about that one. Think. A lot of things go through my mind. I mean, I've been, to a number of museums where there have been installations where I've walked through art, where music has been performed, and but more specifically, I love the Impressionists. I mean, that's sort of a corny answer, but I mean Monet and that whole group. In terms of contemporary art, I think you got me stumped there, Phil.
Great. I'll put a notch on my stick there. And you're a performer as well as a multi kind of octopus-like musician. So tell me about the relationships between performing someone else's work on your extended clarinet and all the things you bring to bear, and your own compositions and how they kind of inform each other, as well as the electronic kind of tech work that you do, as well as the teaching. How does this all fit together?
Well, I feel it all fits together because I am a musician, and I think they're all parts of my musical personality and who I am. One time I thought I should be specializing just on one thing and was doing too many things, but then it dawned on me that, everything I do is me, and it's all part of my own personal expression. So, very early on, I started playing the clarinet, and I was, had ambitions to become a concert clarinetist, but then I started to dabble in some composition and began studying composition and became a composition student at Indiana University and began then performing, other people's pieces on my clarinet, and then I moved to Italy and found out that, I had the ability to perform people's work and almost not make a living completely, but almost make a living performing other people's works. And while I was in Italy, I ran into William O. Smith, who also lived in Italy and still goes back and forth there, and learned a lot of his extended techniques and multiphonics. And I became, sort of the expert resident Italian contemporary music clarinetist for many years, performing other people's works as well as my own. And it was a good way as a young composer, I have to say, to get my foot in the door, where I could offer that service to someone to perform their works, and they would, of course, play my works in return, or I would be on the same program. So it's worked out very well. I think it's very important as a composer, because a lot of the techniques that I use in my pieces, extended techniques, which are not really new anymore, but one really learns a lot just talking to musicians or being a musician and learning things that aren't written out in the classical textbooks or orchestration books that a performer can do. And living in Italy, coming back to that, I think one of the main differences musically is that I learned and began to appreciate much more the idea of timbre in music and sounds for the sake of the sounds, rather than I grew up in sort of an academic background at the university with the 12-tone techniques and serial techniques and things like that, where when I moved to Italy, I realized what a profound influence that John Cage had on the European school, and that certainly had a very profound effect on my colleagues there in Italy. And the music that we were writing was quite different than that. It was based more on getting inside of the sound.
Now, I know you spent some time with Chelsea, and can you tell us what you have learned from mentors like that, from your own teachers, and which are the pearls of wisdom you like to pass on to the next generation?
Okay, well, Chelsea was a very mystic kind of person, and what I learned from him, I think, is that he had a very deep spiritual connection to his music. It was almost as if the music was coming to him from another being, and he was transforming it, recorded it on tape, I think was his technique, improvised it and recorded it on tape, and then somebody came along and transcribed it for him and put it into a normal notation. He was a very interesting character. I guess one of the great things about him, I mean, he was a millionaire, count. He had, I don't know, olive groves or something like that in the south of Italy, and came from a very wealthy family. He was actually a count. But when he died, he gave his luxurious 3-story Roman apartment building to his butler and his maid. And then afterwards, of course, there was the huge controversy. Everyone was scrambling to say that I was really Chelsea in the background, and Chelsea didn't do anything. But I wrote his music for him. But I think the real secret was that he heard all of this music and he improvised it, recorded it on a very rudimentary kind of tape recorder, which I remember seeing at his house, and he would play back tapes for me, things that he had improvised, and then it would be transcribed by somebody. So, I mean, he had a wonderful ear, and for long sounds, for minute microtonal variations and tones, he's someone who really, I was there near the end of his life when he was really finally getting some recognition. The Italian establishment never really recognized him, but so he was always sort of going against the grain, but places like in France and Germany and England, they all began having festivals the last 10 years of his life. So it was very gratifying, to see that happen to somebody, because I think he really deserves it. I think he's one of the greatest composers of that part of the 20th century, the end of the 20th century.
Well, your secret is safe with us, since we know that you are the real Chelsea, but
oh, right.
Since no photos were ever taken, apparently. So you've got this CD coming out on Innova called Caught in Time. Tell us about that.
Well, it's a collection of works, chamber works, from the years about 1997 to 2007. Everything from a flute choir with soloist to some voice pieces with piano, chamber music, trios, piano trios, trios with clarinet and piano. It also features, I'm featured in it as the clarinetist, obviously, and a number of my extended techniques show up in the clarinet parts, but also in the other parts for the other instruments as well. So, I mean, I think there's a great variety of things to choose from on there. They're all very well performed. There's this These were chosen from my library of recordings over the years, and they're the very, very best recordings, both sonically and performance-wise.
Why the iceberg? There's a picture of an iceberg on the front and throughout, and this whole thing is kind of frozen in time. What's the connection?
Well, the connection, I guess, I mean, I was attracted to that particular image, and it happened to be one of my colleagues, Beatrix Reinhardt, where I teach at the College of Staten Island. It's a beautiful image, just on its, but I began thinking the connection between an iceberg, which is always changing in time, and the fear that we might be losing this as time progresses. I could see that directly connecting to one like myself, whose music is gradually changing, and from one day to the next, my music is evolving, and you can hear, from year 97 to year 2007, maybe a Keberle, personality there, but the style changes, from piece to piece. I always had in the back of my mind, I guess one of my fundamental concepts in composing was I was always trying to do something a little bit different, something fresh. So the idea of icebergs, constantly changing in time, appealed to me, and I think relates to what I'm doing as a composer.
Well, some composers work on a new piece, and I guess yours just carve off once in a while, fall into the ocean of sound. So we've been listening to some of that, and I thank you very much, David Keberle, for telling us about you, your life, and your wonderful music. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you, Phil. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you to Innova. It's been a great experience.